Pleasure to speak to all of you. Thank you for joining. I apologize for my throat if I get a little scratchy at times, just getting over some illness. Here in the Northeast where it's very, very cold. So we're going to be talking today about, designing user studies, working on the kinds of scripts you're going to be using to program the platform that we use. Obviously would be applicable anywhere, but just sort of the best practices and design styles that we incorporate to make sure that we have a very successful series of tests. I think one of the challenges that we experience when we write these scripts is to make sure that we follow a set of best practices and guidelines to make sure our participants have just the right amount of information they need to provide good insights for us without leading them in any way to bias the results that we might get, and also to make sure that they're not left confused, unsure of how to proceed, or are not providing enough information for us to really get the full benefit of their time. So we're going to go over a few things today, but the first thing I wanted to focus on was the goal. I think when we're talking about building a user study, when we're talking about building a script, it's important to ask yourself and to lay down for the entire team to understand what specifically you want to learn from the study. I know it sounds kind of obvious, but oftentimes when planning and budgetary talks and all those kind of things happen in organizations, sometimes we lose sight of the focus of the study or whatever we're trying to accomplish, right? So it's important and helpful for everyone who's going to work on the project and gain the insights from the research that we provide, for them to understand exactly what the goal is, what we're looking to find out. So an example might be, we want to learn whether our users are able to find the products that they're looking for on our website. And it can be as simple as that. You can be very specific about what the goal is going to be. If you're say testing a particular function on a site or a large application, you can be very specific about understanding the way users use that particular application or function or what have you. Or you can be a little more broad and just say, we want to understand how a new version of our site compares with in terms of some maybe key audience metrics versus a previous iteration of our site. So as long as you have a goal and that goal kind of remains in focus throughout your planning and the research and when you actually get that research back, I think it'd be very beneficial. So there's some basic steps that we always follow when we start to design a user study. The first would be to define that study, right? To understand what kind of questions we're going to be looking to answer, what insights you want to uncover, and to remember to keep that study focused and not to allow it to become too broad. And by that I mean there is a tendency in all areas, obviously in development projects and in launching new products and so forth, that the goalpost tends to get moved on occasion, right? So you get scope creep when you talk about planning, and particularly with studies, people occasionally like to add additional questions, or as they're investigating a particular avenue, they decide they have additional questions they want to ask. There's always room for additional questions and additional focus areas in a particular study, but just bear in mind not to dilute the original intention of the study or the original goal that you wanted to accomplish by doing so. The next part would be to sort of broadly decide what tasks you're going to ask your users to complete. So in a 30-minute study, that usually is anywhere between 4 to 8 tasks, and that's depending wildly on how complex the tasks are going to be and whether you're going to ask questions before and after or even during the tasks. So if you have a lot of questions you want to ask, you may end up on the lower number of tasks overall for, say, a 30-minute study. And if your tasks are relatively simple and maybe they often lead into one another, then you can get away with including more tasks. But I think an important thing to remember when we're talking about tasks is that they should be simple enough to remember after reading one time. So imagine you're going to be describing what you want someone to do as if you were telling them, over a phone call or over an online meeting, you wouldn't necessarily want to repeat yourself, and people have the tendency to just read something once and then begin. So if it's really, really complex and they have a hard time understanding what the request of the task is, or they're required to go back and reread it multiple times, there's a chance they could miss something that's important to you, or they could misunderstand what you're asking them to do, or they'll just forget to do a particular portion of the task. So we always try to balance the need to make sure that the task on hand is relevant to what our goals are going to be, but also to keep it fairly simple for them to be able to actually accomplish and not be confused by. And finally, we're going to write and review our script to make sure everyone who's involved is going to be in agreement on what the tasks are going to be. We can have some tweaks, we can add questions. And then it's always a good idea at the very end when you're done, to print the task out, go hand it to somebody who hasn't been involved in the process yet, and ask them just to go to the site or application and kind of walk through the tasks. It should really take them not very long, especially if they're a little bit familiar with the site or application in question, but they really haven't looked at the study before. They maybe didn't even know there was a study that was going to happen. But it's a good sanity check to make sure that what your team or what the folks have been working on actually makes sense to somebody who hasn't seen it yet, and you haven't thrown something in there that doesn't make sense to them. So some key script elements I wanted to review just so you understand sort of the main ingredients that go into the script. First, we have the pre-task questions. And those are, anywhere from 3 to maybe 10 establishing questions that you can use to gauge the user's feelings, their habits, specific questions about their needs or desires, their demographics. And we'll show some examples in a little bit about what those are. But the benefit of using those, if you want to, is it helps to prime the user to begin thinking along the lines of the task that you're going to have them complete. And it also gives you some additional information that maybe you didn't have before. A good example might be, we're going to do a study on people taking their car in for an oil change, and you can ask them what kind of car they drive, or how often they get their oil changed, or do they think about, do they wait until they have a coupon in hand to go schedule an oil change? So you get to establish some behaviors, thought patterns, feelings before you actually get started with the tasks. So the tasks are the next big component of the test, and obviously used to determine the usability of a section, or how well people can understand something, or even how people feel or react or have feedback for a particular section of the site that you're working on. And finally, we have some post-task questions that we are able to ask users at the end. This is also a great opportunity to ask for feedback about what they just experienced. You can have them rate certain aspects of the experience that you had them test out. How did they like it? How easy was it for them to understand? Was there anything that they wanted to improve upon after going through the experience? It's also a good opportunity to use some additional advanced questionnaires and data gathering methods that we have available to us that we can go over in a little bit, that can even quantify further the impact your experience has had with users. So some tips for writing great questions and tasks. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's always a bit of a balance they have to strike between making sure that people understand what you're asking them to do and getting the responses that you want, and also not being leading. So the first thing I would suggest is, go at every task with setting aside the preconceived notion of what the user's answer should be or what you would want them to be. Write your question or task, word in a way that's very open-ended and doesn't make any assumptions. And again, keep it simple. If you can put yourself in the user's or tester's shoes, they're not really very familiar or familiar at all with the site or application you're going to have them look at. So they don't necessarily know what buttons are where, or what different elements mean, or what acronyms stand for. And try to keep each task to a single action or a related set of actions that will be easy to remember. It's important, specifically, especially in tests that are, covering a wide range of areas of a site or application, that we don't confuse people or set them off track. If we keep each task to a fairly simple thing to accomplish, like go get a quote for insurance or set an appointment for a doctor's office, those can be a task, which is obviously broken down into a series of actions. But what you would want to avoid is, go schedule a doctor's appointment and then go back and change it and then check your email to make sure you got the change email and then go back and cancel the appointment. That's too much for a task. People aren't going to remember what steps they're going to do. They'll forget to check the email. They'll forget to change the appointment. So just keep it to a single action or step of actions if you can. And obviously users are not perfect, right? None of us are. So leave room and plan for potential errors. Make sure that study instructions are very clear, but also write them in such a way that helps them to understand the general direction you are leading them in, again, without leading them to a specific spot. A good example might be you're writing a series of tasks for some actions they're going to be taking on a website. Maybe if the first task, you're asking them to get to a particular screen, and in the next task, you're picking up from where they were supposed to have left off. But maybe their browser crashed, or maybe they got confused and clicked on the wrong thing. So you can't necessarily expect them to be in the exact spot you want them to be when you start that next task. So a good way to prevent the problem is to say at the beginning of that task, you should now be on this page, or please go to this page if you're not already there, and then continue. Some other tips I wanted to lay out for writing great questions and tasks is first to put users at ease. We need them to understand that we're not testing them. There's no pressure to what they're doing. We want them to be comfortable with them performing these tasks. There's going to be a little bit of nervousness amongst some testers because they know they're being recorded. They know that someone is going to be watching this, and speaking out loud for them can sometimes feel a little unnatural. So we want to include language at the beginning of the study. Just let them know, listen, we're, as we're laid out here, thank you for joining. We're going to take a look at the website. Please know we're not testing you or your ability to use the web, and there are no right or wrong answers. If you feel stuck or unsure of how to proceed, it's important to say so, and there are no wrong answers, and just let them know that they can, if they get stuck, they can just go on to the next task. It happens. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens on occasion. So the next tip I wanted to cover is writing to be relatable. For this task, and for this tip, and specifically when you're writing tasks, I want you to imagine, as silly as it may sound, that you are in a bar talking to a friend, and you're going to describe to them what you want them to do. Imagine there's a laptop in front of the two of you, and you're just going to explain what you want them to do. What kind of language would you use, and how specific would you be? So for this example, we want to put them in a familiar mindset and then relate it back to an experience or a situation that they could find themselves in. So the example of the oil change, you may elicit better responses, and I think oftentimes you would, if you put them into a scenario they can imagine themselves, right? So the example here being the oil change, instead of saying, go to the homepage and schedule an oil change, when you're done, click next, it would be better to give them a scenario where they have to imagine that their car is due for an oil change and they want to schedule one for next week. And then using the site, please make an appointment to have your oil changed. So now they're thinking about, oh yeah, my car does need an oil change. And their actions will be a little more genuine. You also have the experience, you also have the opportunity here to ask them to speak out loud while they're completing the task, and then what to do afterwards. Another great tip is to write open-ended, as we mentioned in the beginning. It's important to not lead them where you want them to go, right? And different users and testers that you're working with have a tendency to either speak a lot or not speak very much. So if we're asking them more open-ended questions, it's going to elicit more responses. An example down below is, When was the last time you went shopping for clothes? That could be a very short answer. Yesterday, last week, I went on Tuesday. But that maybe isn't really answering the question that you wanted them to answer. So tell us about your experience last time you went clothes shopping. And then the person can say, oh, well, I went clothes shopping last week at the mall and it was fine, but I couldn't find a shirt in the size that I was looking for. Well, now you've gotten more of an answer to your question that can help you perhaps lead to additional insights that you're looking for. And you're getting people to think, just as in the previous example about writing to be relatable, you're getting people to think more about the experience that your test is trying to uncover. I'm sure it puts you more in the mindset of thinking about clothes shopping if I'm asking you to describe your experience the last time you went versus just asking you when the last time is that you went shopping for clothes. Also, be neutral in your wording. You know, when we're speaking, sometimes we have a tendency to inject bias into our questions. If you're having someone look at a particular task or go through a particular experience, and then right afterwards you ask them, was what you just did difficult? Now you're just assuming that what they did was difficult, and you're asking them to rate how difficult it was. That's a biased question. Maybe it wasn't difficult at all for them. So when you're asking those questions, make sure that you keep them fairly open-ended and neutral. So instead of saying, did you feel frustrated when you were trying to make that appointment on the site, just ask them, how did you feel as you used the site to make the appointment? And this is a big one that we get a lot of times we work with, especially industries that are very much used to using acronyms and jargon. Jargon is to avoid it at all costs. Most people don't know what your favorite acronym or word for a particular element is, like subnav or MPC. They don't necessarily know what these things mean. So if it's not something that would appear in normal conversation, I would avoid it. And there's an example down there, and it even sounds silly for me to read it, but to say, look for the subnav item next to the hamburger menu in the footer and then find the contact us element. That's not the way you would normally describe to somebody if you were just telling them to go find the contact us button. You would just say, please use the site's menu to find the contact us button. So we're all very used to in our own industries to use this jargon as like a shortcut. But this is, think about how you would describe it in normal conversation. And while we're asking people to perform tasks, it's good to use reminders as guideposts as they're going along. It's okay to remind people that they should be speaking out loud or that they should explain their thought process, right? So we use this a lot just to kind of reinforce the point for people who it may not be natural for them to talk out loud while they're working on the website. So if you just remind them, please explain what you're doing and why, speak it loud as you go. If you inject that into your task wording, it will just help serve as a friendly reminder that they should be speaking out loud. So we talked about sort of the basics there, and now a little more of an aspect of what you can also add to your study script to perhaps elicit more. Talked a little bit about questions, which is something that you don't necessarily need to include in your test. You could just have tasks. But as I mentioned earlier, the questions give you an opportunity to generate and to gather some valuable data, and also to put the user in the mindset of the task they're going to perform. We also have branching logic that's available on our platform. You can kind of take them a bit more step by step if something has a potential area for pitfalls. Or you can ask them specific questions about different experiences. If they clicked one thing versus another thing on a site, you can then ask them a specific question about what they did just by checking to see what they did, what action they took. Did you click on the dog icon or the cat icon? Okay, great. Now we can show them a specific task or question related to what they actually performed. And then really helpful would be task ratings. You can do either during a study task or right after the tasks are completed, you can use a variety of different kinds of rating tools to ask them to provide feedback for what they experienced. You can also ask follow-up questions, something that a lot of tests incorporate is asking them what they would do, asking the user what they would do to make a particular experience better. So this went through the the appointment process. You can ask them right after they're done making an appointment, on a scale of 1 to 5, how easy was it for you to make an appointment? And if they answer, say, a 4 or 5, maybe move them on to the next task using branching logic. But if they answered 1 through 3, then you can use that branching logic to say, well, what would you have improved if you could? And that's a great way to gather some quick feedback about a particular piece of your interaction that maybe was a little bit difficult for them to use. And if you gather enough of that feedback from various users, now you start to establish patterns. Well, we had 10 people go through the appointment process. 7 people said, we did 3 or lower, and they said that the buttons were way at the bottom and they were hard to see and they couldn't figure out how to move to the next step. That's a great piece of feedback that maybe you would have missed if you didn't ask the users why they had such trouble. The other things we can add to the study, either typically at the end, are the Net Promoter Score. So if you're familiar with the NPS, it's a gauge of users' loyalty to a company or brand. You can use this to kind of get a baseline for an NPS for your particular application, or you can see how the NPS has changed since they've used, say, a new section of your site or a new prototype of an application you've created. The system usability score is also a great thing to utilize during testing. It's a industry-wide standard predefined set of questions that judges a user's ability to use the site, to understand how it works, and how how usable it is. The questions are actually kind of genius, and they're written in such a way that a user really would have a hard time tricking the score. It asks a series of counter questions to determine the effectiveness of the site. And then you can use that score as a baseline for an existing site. And then you can use that baseline to judge how well your site does in future iterations. And of course, we have single and multiple choice questions. So you can use them for a variety of reasons. You can use them for ratings, use them to allow them to, to pick a single choice amongst many, or multiple choices like different brands or options that they have used in the past. Just helpful for getting more information and insight from the users. So now we're going to go through a few test script examples that I have and kind of show you how our test scripts are put together and how we've employed some of the features that I explained in the presentation. So the first study we did for this example is a mobile web test study we did for ourselves of Walmart.com, and we wanted to see how users would perform some tasks using Walmart's mobile site, not their app, but the mobile site. Excuse me. So again, we started out by having the user read aloud the little intro paragraph, and that's a great way just to get them used to speaking out loud into the microphone and also reading and speaking at the same time. It's a great primer just to get them acclimated to how much talking we want them to do throughout the study. We also put in some, I'll zoom this in a little bit so it's a little easier to see. If I can. Allows me to zoom. Yeah, there we go. We also incorporate some language to say, please speak aloud and tell us what you're doing. If you feel stuck, it's okay to say so. And it's important to know that we're not testing you or your ability to use it loud. We're just looking for some simple usability issues on the site. And we do provide, usually at the end of every study or test, we provide them the opportunity to include some feedback. So it's a small little text field at the end of the study that they can use to say whatever they want if they didn't like the study or they found some questions confusing, or oftentimes we'll get a lot of positive feedback in that as well. I love the study, or this site is great, such an improvement over what I have used in the past. and they'll oftentimes, some people will include some very specific feedback. Maybe they just thought of it at the end when we asked them, hey, in that second section of the site where I clicked submit for the appointment, I didn't notice the button right away because it was gray. Stuff like that you'll get, which is really helpful towards the end. So in our example test here, we started just by asking some establishing questions. Do they shop at Walmart? The reasons that they shop at Walmart, how often they're in a Walmart, they find themselves in a Walmart store. And here we did use some branching logic. So if they answered that they only go if they go often, right, at least once a month, then we asked them about shopping at Walmart.com. If they only went to Walmart store very rarely, we skipped the question about Walmart.com and went on to the next. We just wanted, and then the point of this was just to sort of tailor the test live in a way that captured some feedback from people who are frequent Walmart shoppers versus people who are infrequent Walmart shoppers. And then we asked some questions about whether they own a smartphone and if they use the Walmart app at all. And here you can see that if they did use the Walmart app, we asked them an NPS question, excuse me, just as an establishing to understand how they view how they would judge in terms of loyalty and everything else, the Walmart app. So next we gave them some instruction. You can show a really quick instruction screen right before they see their first task. This is sort of, a lot of this is built into our tool now, but if there's anything you need them to do right before the task begins, if it's, if you want them to resize the web page so that they see the mobile view of a screen, for example, you can tell them to do it right beforehand. And then here we'd have the first task where we're asking them to purchase some coarse sea salt. And then we have a success failure question. So we can ask them, when we're able to find coarse sea salt. Sometimes you can't expect that they will definitely find the item that you're looking for. And if they didn't find it, we can ask them why they had difficulty finding it. Was it because the store near them, they had a filter turned on that would only show items at the store near them and the store near them didn't have coarse sea salt? Or did they spell it wrong? We give them some opportunities to error correct there. So now in the second task, we asked a question about deciding to buy a new iPhone at Walmart's Walmart cell carrier and how they would go about doing that on the site. And when they're done, we ask them a single ease question, which is ask them to rate how easily it was to perform that task. Task 3 is ask them to go through and buy a Walmart gift card. And again, we establish a scenario for them to understand. So we're saying your friend's birthday is coming up and you want to buy them a Walmart gift card. We're not just saying go buy a Walmart gift card. We're putting them into a scenario where they can imagine that they would actually be on the site looking for a Walmart gift card for their friend because they want to make sure their friend has a nice birthday and they really like their friend and they want to give them a nice gift. And again, we go through a success failure question to make sure that they actually were able to find a gift card. And if they were not, we can ask them, why did you have difficulty? And then you could also ask them, which we didn't hear, which would be, what would you do to improve that experience? So an interesting task for task 4 is we're asking them to see if they can pick up a small gift at the store. And this is, the importance of this question is that it's geography based. So we have to give them more of a scenario and say that they're looking for a particular product at the Wolcott, Connecticut store. So we have to give them a zip code. Things to keep in mind when you're prepping them for these tasks is what sort of data they would need to understand to actually complete the task. And then we ask them some survey questions at the end of the test after they're done. This is a system usability test. So this is a series of questions that is just gauging how easy to use and the usability overall of the application. And finally, the final thoughts at the end. ask them to share any final thoughts on the website or the study today. And then when they're done, they can click next or submit to send their results to us. Another study that I wanted to run through, actually, our platform has varying capabilities. It's not always related to just sharing a screen and capturing their webcam. We can also just do an audio-only study. So in this case, we performed a study with Alexa and Google Home and seeing how the two related to each other in terms of the information that they can provide. So this is all done via audio only. You don't have to rely necessarily on video if audio is relevant to your particular study or test. You can just use audio. So we had them set up the baseline of a little introduction and reading it out loud. It's always a good idea to to tell them exactly how long the test, or roughly how long the test is going to take to complete. It's important for them to kind of understand and gauge in their own mind how long they're going to be taking this test. It's obviously, it's okay if it goes a little under or a little over, but just so they have a gauge to understand how long it's going to take them. Again, we use the second screen just to ask them to speak out loud, describe what they're doing and why. And we also use this opportunity to make sure that the device that they're using is actually in front of them and the volume is turned up loud enough so that their headset or their phone would be able to pick it up. So now we're going into the tasks. We didn't do questions for this particular thing, but we went straight into tasks to ask their device what the weather is tomorrow, and then we listen to the audio. And then we have to gauge whether it was successful, so we asked them, did the voice assistant tell you tomorrow's weather? And then we asked them to rate it. How informative was the information that you got from the voice assistant? And then we asked them at the end, what if anything could have made the assistant voice answer better? And we got a lot of the same answers out of this question, and we also got a lot of different answers. So some people said, I wish it was more detailed. They only told me the temperature and the fact of whether it was going to rain or not. I wish it would tell me what time the sun would come up, and I wish it would tell me, sometimes they want an hourly or, a little bit more of a breakdown, like it's going to be cold in the morning, but warmer towards the afternoon. So we did get some good answers from the open-ended section. So let me give them, for the next task, another scenario for them to imagine. You're new in town, you want to find some lunch options near you. And we had to use the success and failure question. Maybe there are no Chinese food restaurants near the person that's taking this test. You don't always know for sure if there is. So one thing that's not in the script that we could have added in was, if they were unable to find the telephone number of a nearby Chinese food restaurant, we could have sent them to a task to ask about a pizza restaurant or a fast food restaurant. So you build some flexibility into your testing so that all is not lost if they're unable to complete a particular part of the task. Again, we did a similar kind of task where we're asking them to ask Alexa or Google the largest city in California. Thankfully, they're all the same answer, but we asked them, of course, if they got the answer to their question. And then what, if anything, could have made the assistant's answers better? And answers we got to that were things like they told me the largest city, but it would have been nice to know the population or what the demographics of the city were, or they wanted to hear geographically where the city was located, or if the city was the capital of the state that they were getting referenced or not. And we made it a little more fun. So for the next task, we said to put their chef hat on, and they're going to make some chili for a party, and then find a chili recipe with turkey. And this was a fun one because we got to hear all different answers to their question, because they didn't necessarily ask for delicious chili. They may have asked for turkey chili, or they may ask for chili, and they didn't specify turkey, but then they realized afterwards that we wanted to know turkey chili. So it was, fun. And we also made some time for a little fun. We asked them who won Album of the Year at the Grammys, and some people even got the system to play a song from that album. Sometimes people didn't have the ability for their system to play music, like they don't pay for a music subscription, or it's blocked for some reason. So it doesn't always play or do what we wanted it to do. And at the end, we did a system usability scale. to understand and create a baseline number for how effective each one was. So we could compare Google Home and Echo to Amazon Alexa to see which one felt better to the user, right? So see which one felt more usable to them. And then we asked them to share any thoughts about their tests, and a lot of them said it was fun and they like to ask their assistants all kinds of silly questions. And of course, their kids love their assistants and they hear them all the time going off. So it was just a fun test to see how the two compare to each other.